So it turns out Appwrite and React Native are quite a popular combination. Earlier last year, we released the official React Native Appwrite SDK, and to our surprise, this quickly became our most starred SDK on our GitHub account. And because of this, I decided it would be good to create a quick start guide. That's what we're going to do in this video, and also follow up with a few videos on the official Appwrite YouTube channel showing you how to use this SDK. So in this video, what we're going to do is create a very simple project designed to just get you started. And it's going to be a to-do list application. And the core functionality here is going to be to configure the SDK, render out some data from our database, and then also add in some update functionality. So anytime a user clicks on one of these checkboxes, the item will actually update. So this idea here is just to get you started. Now, if you're following this tutorial, there's a few expectations that I'm going to have here. First of all, I'm going to assume that you already have familiarity with Appwrite and you know how to set up a basic Appwrite project. And then the next one is that you are already familiar with React Native, at least a little bit, because we're not going to go through all the basics of how React Native works. And I'm just going to assume that you already know how these two work and you're looking to use this SDK and see how they work together. Also, we are going with the official recommendation from the React Native docs, and we're going to be using Expo to set up our application. And you also want to make sure that you either have Xcode or Android Studio set up, and you can run a basic emulator. So make sure that your computer is all configured and you're ready to just start building and get this project set up. So the very first thing we're going to do here is create a new React Native application with Expo. We just want to make sure our project is set up, our emulator is running, and that all of our files are clear and ready to be added to. So let's go ahead and run npx create Expo app. For the app name, I'm just going to go ahead and call this to-do list. Let's go ahead and cd into our project. And from here, I just want to make sure I install all the default dependencies. And once those dependencies are installed, I can just go ahead and run npm start. And in here, I'm just going to press I to open up my iOS simulator. I already have Xcode installed. So this should open this up on the right side. We'll give this a second, and I'll just make sure that this is full screen. Okay, so I think that's a decent size. I might have to change my screen size a little bit, but now that's running. So when we created our new project, Expo created a bunch of boilerplate for us here. So if we look in our project folders, we have our components here. There's a bunch of components. We can go into app. There's going to be a couple of pages in here, some layouts, and then we can even go through these tabs here. Well, we don't want any of this. What I want is a fresh new project so we can build everything out from scratch. That way, nothing's distracting us. We can start with a clean slate. So in order to do this, there's actually a command that we can run. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new terminal, minimize this, and we should be able to run npm run reset project. So what this did right here is it should remove all my boilerplate code here. So if we look into app, we just have our home page, we have our layout, and let me just go ahead and click R to refresh this here. This should refresh my server. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because this is going to be a little bit too much for me to see everything. So now this is our fresh project. So if we go into our homepage, we have our view, we have some styling here, and I'm going to change this to my app, and we're just going to, actually I'll change this to to-do list like that. And we're just going to do some house cleaning here. So what I want to do is import safe area view. And I just want to change this to safe area view. And what this does is it makes sure that my project doesn't go outside of any borders right here. So it just makes sure that everything's within frame here. And that should be our entire project at this point. Now for my Appwrite backend, I'm going to be using Appwrite Cloud. You could use a self-hosted version of this, but all I have here is a fresh new project with a database and a collection. So I just created this. In here, if I go to the databases tab, I created a new database called prod. I created a collection here called tasks. You can just go ahead and recreate this. And I have a few items in here. Now, to add some attributes, you can go ahead and click on attributes, add an attribute. And all I added was an attribute called body, which is a string, and then an attribute called complete, which is a Boolean value. Now, from here, one of the first things I want to do here, just to make sure we don't miss this step here, is to make sure that we have some permissions set. This way, anytime we make some requests here, we can actually get the data and not be blocked. We're just going to go ahead and set permissions to any, and we're just going to set this to read, create, update, and delete. So go ahead and update that. We're going to set permissions on our collection, build out whatever kind of database you need, but that's a very important step here. Now, from this point on, that's all I have set up here. At this point, we're just going to go ahead and go to the Overview tab and click on React Native for the platform that we're going to use. So this is a relatively new option. It's about just under a year old at this point since we've added this, but now you can click on React Native. If you're using the Android emulator, go ahead and select Android. For now, I'm just going to be doing iOS. Eventually, you want to do both of these. So let's go ahead and just call this my app. We'll leave it like that. For the bundle ID, I'll just call it com.dennis.todo. So it's just like a reverse domain. We're just going to go ahead and set that up. Make sure you remember what you add here. Don't use my credentials, use your own. This can be whatever you want here. So go ahead and click on that or set it. For Android, you're going to do a package name. So it's going to be a little bit different. Go ahead and click on next. So from here, we just want to go ahead and install React Native Appwrite. So we'll just continue. We're going to build all this out from scratch. In here, all we're doing is adding the platform. So the platform should now be added. We have that here. And in the next step here, we're going to need to go back into our project here. And I just want to make sure that I have this installed here. So we're going to go ahead and bring this up. We'll clear this and we'll do npm I react-native appwrite. Okay, so that'll get that installed here. And we're just going to configure the SDK right now. So now that that's installed here, let's go ahead and create a folder within the root directory. And I'm just going to call this lib. And within lib, we're going to create a file for our Appwrite configuration. So we'll call this appwrite.js. And in here, we just want to make some imports. So we want to import client. We also want databases. And this is coming from React Native Appwrite. Okay, so now that that's imported, the first thing I want to do is go ahead and create my client instance. So we need to configure this, and we're going to call new client. And from client, we're going to call set endpoint. So we want to make sure that we have an endpoint set. And from here, I can just go ahead and get this from my Appwrite backend here. So we want to go ahead and grab this right here. So the API endpoint, I'm using cloud. And the way that I'm going to do this is first create a config variable, and I'm going to add in my credentials here. So typically, you'd want to add in some kind of environment variables. We're not going to focus on that right now. I'm putting my credentials directly in here, but normally you'd want to hide that. So this will be my endpoint, and I can just paste that in. Then the next one's going to be the project ID, and I'll grab that from my backend. So this is my project ID. And I also want my database, so I'm just going to call this DB, and I called my database prod. And for collections, because we can have multiple collections, I'm going to go ahead and nest this and create another key value pair. And we're going to call this tasks here, and then the actual ID for that collection, I just made that a string value called tasks. So here in our databases, we have the database ID of prod, and then we have the collection ID of tasks. That's also the name of that collection. So now in my client, I can just go ahead and do config.endpoint, and then we can also set the project. So we'll do set project, and this is going to be config.project. For React Native, we also need to set a platform here. So for iOS, this is going to be that bundle ID. For Android, this is going to be the package name. So we don't know what the user is using. Depending on how a user actually visits our app, this is going to change. So what we need to do is we need to create a condition here. So we can go ahead and call this set platform here. And this is where we add the bundle ID or the package name. Now we can't just set it because this is going to change depending on that user. So from React Native, we can import something called platform, and platform allows us to check what our current user is using. So what we could do is go ahead and create like a switch statement. You could use an if-else statement, and we're just going to go ahead and call platform.os. So what is the user using here? So from here, we're just going to go ahead and create a case. So if the case is iOS, then we're just going to go ahead and set platform here for the client. So we're going to call client.setPlatform. So this is going to be com.dennis.todo. So that was my bundle ID. Now, what we could do is just go ahead and call break here. And then for the next case, we can just go ahead and see if this is Android. So anytime a user uses our platform from here, we can just call client.setPlatform. And here you would put in the package name. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out, but this is how you would go ahead and add those conditions. So this is a vital step in this process. Make sure that anytime you're using React Native, you set the platform, and that's crucial for this process here. Now let's go ahead and configure our database now. So we'll do const databases or database, and we're going to create a new instance of our database. So we'll use the databases class. We'll pass in the client here. And I just want to make sure to export this. So we want to export database, and I'll export config like that. And if anything, I'll export the client if we need this later on. So that completes our configuration. We import client and database from React Native Appwrite. We use platform to check what platform we have. We create the client here. We set all these values for the client and some configuration. Now, in the future, we are going to use the database and the collection itself to make actual requests. So that's why that needed to be exported. So now it's time for the good stuff. We're going to go ahead and make a request to our backend and render some data out. So let's close out our appwrite.js file. And in here, we need to make a few imports. So the first thing we need to import is use effect. Then we want to import use state. Then we want to go ahead and import from our Appwrite file our config. And we also want to import database. And this is coming from our lib folder. And then we're going into Appwrite. Okay, so now that those are imported, we want to make sure we can set some state here. So first we want to set our state for tasks. We also want the setter. And this is going to be just an empty array inside of use state. We also want something to handle errors. So this will be error and then set error. And the default value for error is going to be null. So now that we have our state, we want to go ahead and just call use effect. And for use effect, we're just going to set an empty dependency array. So this is going to get called once. And the function that's going to kick everything off inside of use effect is going to be init, and this is going to be an async function. And from here, I want to create a function to actually get some data from my database. So this will be called get data. And in here, we're going to create a try catch statement here. So we're going to make a request. If that request happens to fail, then we just want to go ahead and catch that error. And we're going to set the error state. And then we also want to render this out. And if we happen to have an error, then what I want to do here is just go ahead and create a condition. We're going to render this out. And for now, I'm not going to worry about styling. We're just going to stringify this and make sure that some kind of error actually appears there. Now, to complete this request, we're just going to go ahead and call database.listDocuments. And for the database ID, we just want to go ahead and call config.db. Then for the collection, we'll call config.col.tasks. So this will complete the request to our backend. And in the response, this is going to give us the documents, and it's also going to give us a total. So we just want to destructure this. The last thing I want to do is go ahead and call set tasks, and this is going to be the documents here. So we'll pass that in. This is going to update the state, and from here, we should be able to render this out. Actually, before we do that, I just want to go ahead and call get data inside of init here, and I just want to make sure to console this out. I want to see that this request actually works before we go any further. So let's go ahead and console this out, and if we look at the logs here, I can just do refresh. Here we go. We see the documents. We see all our items, tasks right there. Perfect. It's working. Now we can move on to actually rendering this. To render this data out, we're going to use the flat list component, which is one of the ways we can do this in React Native. And I want to call this just under my headline here. So we'll just go ahead and create flat list. And the first thing I need to do is go ahead and pass in some data here. And for each item, I want to call render item, which allows us to grab the item and then render out a component here. So for the component, we're just going to render out for now just a simple text component. So we'll throw in text here, and then I'll just get the item body, and I just want to see the item as it's being rendered out. So once this is saved, here we see the actual item itself. Now the text is actually really small, so I'm just going to fix this right now, but congratulations if you got this far. We just officially connected the Appwrite SDK. So we're going to clean up a little bit of styling here, make this look nicer. And the way that I'm going to do this with my text here is I'm going to create a custom text component. So that way we can pass in different font sizes, and it's just going to look much cleaner and actually separate our titles from the core text. And it's going to make this much more readable. So inside of my layout, instead of using a stack right now, because this application is very simple, we're going to use a slot. So we just want to render out the child components here. And when I save this, we're going to see the tab title here disappear, or the page title. So that way it looks a little bit better. For now, until we configure a stack, we simply just don't need that. For the custom text component, what I'm going to do here is go ahead and create a new folder called components. And then this component is going to be called text custom. So I just want to default to writing text and then have it autofill to custom. And this is going to be the text that we're going to use throughout our page here. So once we use this component, we're going to be able to style it through our own props. But this way, instead of having to deal with every single piece of text there and then passing down some kind of style into that text or global style, I can just reuse this component. If I want to modify it, it's going to be much easier that way. So to create this component, I'm going to use a VS Code extension that I have that allows me to use these code snippets. So RNFE allows me to create a React Native functional component and export it. So it just builds that default boilerplate code for me. And in this component, I want to start with a few things here. So first of all, I first want to just render out just the text itself. I also want to pass down any styles that I want to pass in manually as I'm using this component. Then I want to set the font size. So by default, I'm going to be using this component. The font will be 16, but if I want to modify this, I just want to pass this down as a prop and not have to go through the style process. And I also need the children here. So the text value will just be the children, so we'll pass this through. And to set the styles, we're just going to go ahead and set the style attribute, and we're going to pass down any styles from the parent, and we also want to throw in the font size. And that right there should complete my component. So now I can use this throughout my application. So let's go ahead and import text custom, and we can modify a few of these. So for my title, we'll just do text custom. And for the font size, I just want to set this to, let's say 18. That'll make it bigger. Let's actually set this to 22. And then for this, we're just going to do text custom, and we can just leave it like that. So I want 22 and 16 for the text size. Now the list item should also be its own component. So we're just going to go ahead and add this into the components folder. So this will be list item.tsx, and we're going to use that same code snippet. So React Native function component exported here. And with this, we want to pass down the task as a prop. And I want to go ahead and destructure the task here. So first we want the body. We also want the task ID, and then we want the complete value. And that's all coming from task. Now in this list item component, I also want to use the custom text here. So we want to change this to text custom. We want to render out the body. And with this, we want to render out a checkbox. Now for the checkbox, we're going to use a third-party package called Expo Checkbox. And this is going to give us a component to actually create the checkbox itself. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal and let's install this. So we'll do npm install Expo Checkbox. And from here, we can just go ahead and import this. So we'll import checkbox from Expo Checkbox. Now in here, let's go ahead and just render this out. So this will be checkbox. And then for the value here, I'm just going to manually set this. So we'll set this to false. That means it's not checked. So let's leave it like that. And let's actually just render out this list item component. So we just want to make sure that this is updated before we do anything else. So let's import list item. And here we can render this out. So let's go ahead and select the text here, and we'll change this to list item. And we want to pass in the actual item here. So that'll be passed down as task, and we'll throw in the item. So now that I passed that through, here we see the checkbox here. Let's actually change the size of that text here. I just want to make sure the font size is a little bit bigger. We'll set that to 18. It's a little bit more visible. And let's just go ahead and style each list item. So to do this, let's import style sheet from React Native. And once we have that, let's go ahead and set this up. So we'll call this styles here, and we'll call style sheet.create. Now for the styles here, I'm just going to go ahead and import some values that I have preset here, and we'll just kind of highlight this. So we have our item wrapper here, and here we just display the row as flex. Flex direction is row. We make sure that we're aligned where the top of the text and the checkbox will be aligned at the top and not at the center. We set some gaps, set some padding, and that's it. So now to use this, we can just go ahead and go into our view. We'll just do style, and that's going to equal to styles. And I'll change that to styles like that. And we're just going to set this to item wrapper. And right there, that looks a little bit better. Now for our homepage, I also want to make sure that we set some styles here. So we'll do style sheet. We'll bring that in. And I'm just going to paste in some values here as well. So here I set a container. We just set some padding here. So that's going to be for the entire application. And then the headline itself is going to have some styling. So what I'm going to do is wrap safe area inside of a view so we can add in proper styling. And then we're going to take this closing view, and I'm just going to bring this down here just to make sure that we can style the component within. Then we can change the style here. And this is going to point to styles.container. So that fixed some spacing right there. And for the headline, we're just going to do style, and that's going to be styles.headline. Okay, so that's looking better. I think that completes our styling here. And what we can do is go ahead and finalize the actual checkbox functionality. I want to make sure that we can click on these and then actually go ahead and update our database on the back end. So within list item, what we're going to do here is we're first going to set a state, and we're going to get the initial state from the item that's being passed down as a prop. So we're going to set a state called checked. Then we're going to use that state to set the value within our checkbox here. So that's going to be the initial value from the actual item being rendered out. We'll update the database in the backend real quick. In fact, what I'm going to do is make sure that one of my items is marked complete. So this way we can see it right away. Let's go ahead and change this to true. We'll set update, and we're going to use that as the initial value. So once we do that, then we're going to be able to toggle this. So we're going to call a handle update function, or we're going to create one. And that function is going to send a request to the backend, but also update the state as well. And I just realized that this needs to be complete. It looks like there's a typo there. I'm not sure when that happened, but that should fix it. So to start, let's go ahead and import useState. And once we have our state, let's go ahead and set it. And this will be check and set check. And then by default, we're just going to pass the value of complete through to this. So now that I have that, we're just going to take check here, and we're going to throw that into the value. So now when this is rendered out, I'm just going to do R to refresh this, make sure that we get the latest values here. And there we go. So now this is the real database with an actual checked item. I still can't update it just yet, but we're going to fix that. So to make this work, let's go ahead and create a function called handle update. We'll make sure that this is an async function. And in the function, I'll create a try catch statement. And for now, let's just console out the error. And in the try statement, we're just going to call database.updateDocument. We'll pass in the database ID, the collection ID. Then we need to get the actual item ID, the item that we're going to update. And from here, we're just going to pass in complete, but we're going to pass in the opposite value of what we currently have in there. So it's just going to alternate that value every single time we click on it. Now, I do need to make sure that these values are imported. So let's go ahead and import database, config, and this is coming from lib and Appwrite. Now, once we update our database, we also want to make sure to update the state so we can actually see this be represented on every single click here. So what we want to do is go ahead and just invert this. So we just want to do check like that, and we'll just change the current state from what the current value or the previous value was. So if it was false, now it's going to be true. If it's true, it's false. And this will allow us to update our UI. Even if our database still takes another half a second to update, it allows us to modify that real quick. So let's go ahead and continue from here. Now to actually represent this value, we pass in check here, but we want to update this and call handle update. So we're going to call on value change here, and we're going to call handle update. So I can go ahead and save this. Now in theory, I'm going to click R here just to make sure all this is refreshed. I should be able to click on this and actually see these change. So if I refresh it again, the new data is rendered out. We can see this was updated in our database. I can refresh that, try this again, and everything's working, and that completes our application. So that's it for this specific project here. It was meant to be very simple just to get you started. If you like this, make sure to subscribe to the Appwrite YouTube channel, like the video, and stick around because I'm going to do a few more videos like this where we'll handle authentication. We'll even do OAuth, and maybe we'll work on a few Appwrite React Native projects. So I'll see you all in the next video.